What's the best first date escape you ever pulled?
The best first date escape I ever pulled did not begin with a lie or a sprint. It began with a chair. Not even a special chair, just one I angled a few degrees toward a door and a window that bounced city light off the cutlery. The place had that forgiving hum that makes you feel anonymous. Low jazz, clinks, two birthday tables pretending not to be loud, a barback polishing glasses like a meditation. I arrived a little early because early is the only way to hold the map in your hands. Early lets you choose sightlines, exits, and a reason to leave that does not look like fear. Early means the story starts with you choosing where to sit, not with someone else deciding where you belong. By then, I had a system that felt less like paranoia and more like an umbrella in a fickle climate. Public spot, yes. Shared location with a friend, yes. A text ready to send that would nudge a phone call at any time, yes. Shoes that could handle a brisk walk, yes. And a private little rule that sounds dramatic until you have needed it once: no first drink you haven't seen poured, no second drink until a first glass is empty, no third drink on a first date. Maintenance first, body safe, mind steady, story yours. He arrived with a breeze that belonged to someone who believes the room is already making space for him. It was that tiny choreography you notice after you have learned to notice. The way he drifted behind my chair, not across from it. The half glance he gave to the door like he was tracking traffic. The phone placed face down but still within reach as if it had its own seat. He wore a good watch, not expensive enough to show off, expensive enough to know. He had the posture of someone used to being asked follow-up questions. Friendly enough to look harmless, curated enough to be forgettable. If he had been a photo, the algorithm would have sent him to everyone. 2 minutes in, the red flags were not single banners. They were three small threads tugging at different corners. The first tug was the performance at the bar directed at a bartender's patience he mistook for interest. The second tug was the way he lifted the menu and rolled his wrist, scanning prices before ingredients. The third tug was how he announced preferences like rules, only without using words like please or would you. Not declarations, just a cadence that made everything around him adjust. The room kept humming. My chair stayed angled to the door. This is the part where someone expects drama to enter holding a sign. People look for cinematic danger on dates, shouting, slamming, the obvious line you can point to later as the reason you left. The thing about danger is that it loves camouflage. It prefers the soft launch. It likes to wear charm and pretend charm is kindness. It keeps its hands open so you notice how they are empty, not how they are positioned. He did not say anything that would shock an advice column. He did smaller things. When the server came over, he complimented her in a way that felt like a task disguised as praise. When I ordered, he made a face just for himself, small, quick, the kind you catch only if you are watching the muscles at the edge of a jaw. He suggested a second location before the appetizers, like he was laying track in advance.
I have a different rule for that move. If someone tries to relocate before the room has had a chance to tell you about them, assume the next room is not for you. People who are safe do not hurry you into places with fewer witnesses. People who are kind do not need to control the setting to feel interesting. People who are patient are curious. People who are patient can let a first hour be a first hour. He began layering little hooks, future references to establish momentum. He knew a rooftop that would be better for night views. He knew a friend who could get us into a spot that was usually full. He knew a shortcut to the late show at a place that never had tickets. It looked like generosity. It felt like a funnel. Somewhere behind his shoulder, a group at the corner table blew out candles. A server clapped along with a face that said she'd done this 3 times already tonight and would still do it once more. The city outside threw reflections of brake lights onto the wine glasses, and the shadow of a passing cyclist cut a line across our table. The first drink was fine, because I watched it get made and watched it arrive. The second drink did not arrive, because I asked for water, and the server brought it with a conspiratorial half-smirk that only showed later in the story. While he scrolled something, as if checking a late email, I excused myself with something so ordinary it would have dissolved if you tried to hold it. A quick step to the restroom, a quick wash of hands, a breath in a mirror that was more brutally honest than even mirrors intend to be. In that mirror was a little printed card I had clocked on the way in, the kind of sign venues keep quietly because they know stories do not always end on the internet. If you feel uncomfortable, it said without saying, in 20 words and a symbol, there are ways to ask for help without making noise. There is a moment in every exit where the hardest part is not logistics, it is permission. You stand under a fluorescent light and try to decide if your life is dramatic enough to deserve assistance. You tally the offenses, you invent a jury. You make a case to a version of yourself who believes in giving strangers more chances than you would give yourself. You consider the possibility that you are misreading. You consider the more dangerous possibility that you are not. I rinsed my hands again for no reason except the ritual of it, and I stepped out into the hallway and made eye contact with the server. She had the kind of alertness hospitality workers develop, that scan that takes in more than it has time to. She asked without sound. I answered without sound. She nodded in a small way that said there is a path here, and it does not look like a scene. Then she moved with the fluid competence of a person who has walked this path with others and knows where the floor squeaks.
The plan had gears already waiting. She would distract the table just enough to keep eyes off me while the host made a call to the manager, who would take me through the kitchen and out the delivery door to the side street. She would add a charge to the check in a way that let me leave cash without it looking like a debt. The bartender would pour a replacement water and ask a question that required a longer answer. It was choreography. You can only perform if the other dancers understand the music. I exhaled with a gratitude that felt almost silly, and then felt sacred. At that moment, a simple exit felt like a room full of people deciding that my version of the story mattered. When I reached the host stand, a second current complicated the water. She was there, scanning the room, eyes doing that quick, hopeful, anxious dance of someone arriving to meet a person who might be better or worse than a profile suggested. She looked like a mirror universe of me 20 minutes ago. The coat she clutched was a color you pick when you want to look awake. She was holding a phone that showed a photo, and that photo was a face I had just left at a table. The host saw the flicker cross my face and tilted a little, as if offering a question without adding words to the air. In that instant, the story stopped being only about leaving and became about diverting. It turns out the best escape sometimes is an extraction you do not know you are about to run. I could have kept moving, and the staff would have sealed the openings behind me, and it would have been clean, and maybe wise. Instead, I turned slightly and let my path intersect hers in that casual way strangers have when they stand too close at a podium and pretend not to compare shoes. She looked past me toward the bar. He had that same half posture toward the door, and that same phone sitting like a courtroom exhibit. A waiter brought plates to our table, and he accepted them with the ease of a person who expects warmth to be provided in courses. There is a kind of quick math that happens in the space of a heartbeat when you realize you are not the only person a pattern is trying to catch. If I left, she walked straight into it. If I stayed, I let the pattern extend another few minutes. I did not have authority over her choices. I did have information. The host gave the smallest nod in the direction of the manager, who was already moving from the back, a kind of benevolent ghost in a black shirt with a keyring that may as well have been a set of capes. The server intercepted the birthday table with a tray of sparkling water as decoys. The bartender wiped down an already clean section of wood with the focus of someone who understands what distraction looks like from the side.
The manager arrived like a solution disguised as a person. He put himself in the space between our little knot and the path to the table where the future was waiting. He had a script, but it did not feel like a script because he let his eyes do the heavy lifting. The host leaned into his shoulder with a 3-second brief. The plan adjusted itself. I recognized the new map as it formed because I had drawn versions of it in other rooms with other faces. Step 1, peel me out quietly. Step 2, delay the table with a check question that would require detailed answers from the house computer. Step 3, intervene with our new arrival under the pretext of confirming a reservation so that the conversation happened here, not there. Step 4, offer choices that did not include walking into someone else's orbit. At the exact moment this machinery started to move, he stood. It is always the small coincidences that feel like fate when really they are simply the math of crowded rooms. He stood to stretch or to scan or to check the entry for the next performance of his evening. He stood with a posture that reached ahead of him. His eyes found ours, not because we were dramatic, but because we were a cluster of attention in a room designed to make attention flow. The manager pivoted just enough to block the sightline. The bartender called out something light that did not need an answer, but demanded one. The server reached for a reservation book as if it were a shield. My heart did the inconvenient drumbeat it always does when adrenaline calls itself to the front of the line. The first date portion of this evening was over. The escape plan had turned into a rescue with guest stars. I could leave now with a clean voltage of relief, or I could be the person who reaches back for someone else. I remembered the way my chair had faced the door. I remembered the sign in the mirror. I remembered that we are, whether we want to admit it, choreographers for each other all the time. I took 2 steps toward the kitchen hallway and then stopped. The manager's eyes flicked to mine and asked, without asking, if I wanted the side street and a breath. He would make that happen and fold the night around the absence so it looked like a trick, not a retreat.
The new arrival looked down at her phone and then up at the room with the exact expression that makes strangers kinder if strangers are going to be kind. He began to move in our direction, not quickly, but with the determination of a person who believes he is owed explanations. The server slid into place like a midfielder stealing a pass and invited me down the hallway with her body language. The sound of plates and the lion purr of the dishwashers grew louder. The smell of citrus and onions and hot metal erased the bar's perfume. For one beat, the scene froze the way a story pauses at the part where the narrator decides which thread to follow. I could feel the cool air of the delivery door already, the square of night that meant free. I could also feel the pull of the room where a woman about to meet a stranger might appreciate someone quietly ruining that plan.
That is how the best first date escape I ever pulled pivoted from a solo exit to a tandem maneuver none of us had rehearsed. I nodded to the manager, the smallest yes that meant proceed with the invisible corridors. Then I turned back toward the host stand as he took another step forward and as the host lifted the reservation book like a conductor's baton. Somewhere, a birthday table began another chorus. Somewhere outside, a siren stitched a blue thread along the block. Somewhere inside, a door with a push bar waited with its uncomplicated logic. I moved toward the decision that would make the rest of the night possible. The server leaned in with the water glass and placed it down harder than necessary, a sharp clink that made heads turn and gave us all a few more seconds. She whispered nothing, but the proximity carried weight. It was that universal language of service industry veterans. I'm here. I've seen this. I won't let it collapse silently. He approached with the smile of someone about to rehearse charm for the second time that night. But the edges of his expression didn't quite sync with his eyes. That's the thing about repetition. It wears at the seams. His earlier polish had dulled into entitlement, like the room should have applauded his patience for waiting this long. He spoke, but the words dissolved into the clatter of plates and the swell of birthday applause. You don't always need to hear the script to recognize the act. The manager intercepted with a reservation question that didn't need answering, yet demanded his attention. The host leaned forward, flipping pages with a gravity reserved for sacred texts. The server reappeared on his other side with a new suggestion for dessert specials, delivered at a tempo that left no room for interruption. It was a three-pronged defense, and it worked. Not to defeat him, but to stall him long enough for the tide to shift. She looked at me then, finally, properly. Not grateful, not frightened, just awake in the way someone becomes when the lighting suddenly changes in the middle of a performance. Her eyebrows asked if I was part of this, if I was obstacle or ally, if my proximity was chance or choreography. I gave her nothing more than a small tilt of the head toward the host stand, the universal gesture of, this way is out if you want it. For a moment, the night balanced on the edge of choice. I could feel my own exit evaporating into something larger than self-preservation. And as he tried to recalibrate under the spotlight of three simultaneous distractions, she tightened her grip on her phone, not to call him, not to call anyone, but to anchor herself to the decision she was about to make.
The moment shifted from private survival to collective choreography. One step forward, one step back, a half second of hesitation, and suddenly every stranger in the room was part of a play no one had auditioned for. The host angled the reservation book as though it required urgent study. The manager drew a neat, invisible line across the floor with his stance. The server hovered with a tray that became both prop and shield. And there I stood, caught between a door that promised release and a responsibility that whispered louder than fear. She was still holding her phone, thumb poised like she was about to double-check the time. Her eyes moved in quick flickers from his table to the bar, back to the room's exits without ever quite landing. That was the look of someone calculating, rehearsing the polite script she would deploy if things went sideways. I recognized it because I had worn it myself so many times it might as well have been stitched inside my jacket lining. People think preparation looks like strength. More often it looks like silent bargaining with the air. He rose from his chair with that same quiet assumption of ownership, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself because it believes the ground is already tilted in its favor. His shoulders carried the air of someone who never asked if he was welcome. He just measured how quickly the welcome would arrive. That was the first time my chest compressed, not because he was near, but because I could see her story unfolding with the same crooked angles as mine had begun. The manager gave me a glance so precise it could have been an entire sentence. It said,
"You can go now, and no one will question it." It said, "You can leave her to the version of this night she has not yet discovered." It said, "Both are defensible, and both will follow you home in different ways." So, I pivoted. Just enough to close the gap between us. Not a declaration, not a rescue, just an alignment of bodies in space that made it harder for him to fold her directly into his script. When you stand close to someone at the exact moment another person expects access, you become an interruption, disguised as a coincidence. I positioned myself as though checking a message, angled so she could step backward if she needed to, angled so he would need to address me before her.
I should have walked away. Every rule I had ever drilled into myself pointed toward clean breaks. Never volunteer, never improvise, never carry someone else's story out with yours. Yet the longer I stood there, the clearer it became. This wasn't improvisation, it was recognition. I had been her before, sitting on the edge of a chair, trying to look polite while cataloging exits. I had done the smile that buys you 5 more minutes of space. I had listened to someone talk while my whole body tried to memorize how far the door was, how quickly a bag could be scooped up, whether the staff would notice if I vanished. There is no winning in those moments, only survival. And survival can mean being seen just once by someone who understands what you're not saying. So when the manager slid in another line of questions about the reservation list, and the host angled his body so she could move without obstruction, I matched their rhythm. One step back, one pivot sideways, a hand brushing the counter as if by accident. Each move was small enough not to register, large enough to create distance between her and the table she was supposed to walk toward. He was still smiling, but now the smile was showing strain. People who are used to control don't panic when they lose it, they tighten. His eyes flicked past us to the door, then back to the host, then briefly to her, as if trying to measure where the fault line had opened. I knew that calculation. It wasn't anger yet, it was disbelief, the first crack in the certainty that the world would always arrange itself around his needs. Restaurants can be loud, chaotic, ungovernable spaces. But that night, the chaos was an ally. Every crash of dishes from the kitchen gave us cover. Every cheer from the birthday table masked another small maneuver. Even the jazz on the speakers seemed to swell at convenient moments, wrapping everything in a soundtrack that pretended this was nothing more than a busy Friday. The staff were extraordinary, though none of them looked like they were doing anything special. The manager's questions sounded routine. The host's slow page-turning looked like bureaucracy. The server's steady return with water and plates could have been mistaken for overservice. But under the surface, each gesture was a shield. They were trained in this dance, and I was being folded into it. It struck me, even in the adrenaline of the moment, how often these unsung workers become first responders. We expect them to pour drinks and clear tables, yet they are the ones who notice when someone's date doesn't look right, when a laugh doesn't sound like consent, when a customer lingers too close to the wrong person. They run interference without medals or headlines, armed only with trays and menus. That night, I was profoundly grateful for their quiet vigilance. Without it, I would have been just another anxious stranger trying to block a storm with bare hands. With them, we were a unit, each playing a part in a script too subtle for the person it was written against. She shifted closer to me, so slight the movement could have been incidental, but I felt the choice solidify in that inch of space. She wasn't walking to his table. She wasn't pretending anymore. She was ready to step out of the script he thought he controlled. I leaned just enough to catch the manager's eye, and he adjusted seamlessly, signaling the kitchen hallway with a nod, so tiny it could have been a muscle twitch. The host closed the reservation book with deliberate weight, as though concluding a ceremony. The server swooped in with a tray of untouched appetizers and demanded attention with the volume of her presence. We had the opening. It was there, suspended in time, like the beat before a chorus drops. And that's when he spoke again. The words are not important, not because I've forgotten them, but because they were irrelevant. They were the kind of words designed only to stall, to guilt, to suggest inevitability, a request wrapped as a compliment, an expectation disguised as charm. He spoke, and the room itself seemed to stiffen. The birthday table fell momentarily quiet. The bartender paused mid-wipe. Even the music seemed to stumble in its rhythm. But silence can be a weapon too. Nobody answered him. Not me, not her, not the staff. And in that vacuum, his certainty began to crack. We moved then, together, almost casually, as though we were just two patrons relocating toward another part of the restaurant. She matched my pace without hesitation, clutching her phone and coat like talismans. The manager fell in behind us, a shadow making sure no interruptions followed. The host redirected him with a fabricated question about billing, holding his attention just long enough. The server slid between us and the main dining area like a curtain being drawn.
Through the kitchen doors, the light changed, harsher, fluorescent, filled with the hiss of grills and the clang of pans. It was a different world back there, one that smelled of onions and citrus, sweat and steel. The chaos was louder, but safer. The staff back there barely glanced at us. They had their own battles with orders and timing, yet their indifference was sanctuary. No one was performing here. The delivery door was ahead, painted gray, its metal bar gleaming faintly under the lights. One push, and the night outside would swallow us whole. But I hesitated, because escape was not the end. It was the beginning of choices that stretched farther than a side street. And she hesitated too, not because she doubted leaving, but because leaving meant rewriting the story she thought she had walked in to live. First dates are supposed to be beginnings. This one had to end before it started. And sometimes endings are heavier than danger itself. We stood in that narrow hallway, the door in front of us, the dining room behind, and for the first time that night, I realized the story wasn't mine anymore. It was ours.
The hallway smelled of lemon cleaner and grease, a cocktail of industry that never made it to the dining room. The hiss of the fryers, the clang of pans, the shouts of line cooks, they formed a backdrop so constant it became almost invisible. Behind us, the door to the dining room swung open and shut, letting in brief bursts of laughter, clinking glass, and that curated jazz that suddenly felt like it belonged to another planet. Ahead of us, a gray metal door with a bar that promised air, night, distance. It should have been simple. Push, step, leave. But nothing felt simple anymore. She clutched her coat tighter, as though wrapping herself against more than the chill outside. Her phone remained in her other hand, screen dark, knuckles white. I could see the tremor at the edges of her fingers, the body trying to process what the mind wouldn't let surface yet. Fear doesn't always look like screaming. More often, it looks like that. A small vibration running under the skin, unacknowledged but undeniable. I pressed my palm to the door bar, cold metal. One push, and we would be gone. But the weight behind the choice held me still. Leaving was escape, but leaving without acknowledging what had just almost happened. It felt incomplete, like cutting out mid-sentence. And somewhere behind us, he was probably still standing at the host stand, recalibrating, deciding whether to follow, whether to reassert the control he thought he had. The manager caught up to us, his steps unhurried but deliberate. He spoke low, so the kitchen noise swallowed the words. "Side street is clear, cab stands 2 blocks left. Do you want me to walk you there?" His eyes weren't on me. They were on her. It was her decision now. She nodded, quick and sharp, the way you nod when words might break you. So we pushed. The bar depressed with a groan, the hydraulics exhaled, and the night rushed in. The city air was damp, holding the residue of a rain that had passed an hour earlier. Asphalt gleamed in fractured mirrors under the streetlights. The dumpsters near the door carried their own pungent testimony to the life of restaurants. Citrus rinds, cardboard, onion skins, glass bottles clinking as they settled. Somewhere down the block, a siren wailed, a distant sound that stitched its own urgency into the night. We stepped into it, as though surfacing from water. For a second, the relief was so sharp it felt like dizziness. Freedom does that. You expect it to taste like triumph. Instead, it tastes like oxygen, metallic and raw, because your body's still running on adrenaline. She pulled her coat around herself, finally sliding one arm into the sleeve, then the other. Her movements were mechanical, as though she was operating instructions rather than inhabiting her body. I stayed close, but not too close, leaving a space she could fill or not. The manager lingered by the door, one hand on the frame, scanning the street with the alertness of someone who had done this before. 2 blocks down, he reminded us. If he tries to follow, don't stop walking. There's a cab line outside the hotel. They know me there. You'll be safe. Safe. Such a small word. Such a massive promise. She nodded again, eyes fixed on the wet pavement. We started walking.
The city has a way of noticing you when you least want it to. Cars slowed just enough to glance. A couple outside a bar looked up mid-conversation. A man smoking on a stoop followed us with his eyes. None of them knew the story, but tension leaks. It vibrates in the way your stride doesn't match the rhythm of the street. It shows in the way your shoulders scan before your head turns. Half a block in, she finally spoke.
Not in sentences, just fragments, half-swallowed words that tumbled like debris after an avalanche. Profile. Didn't look like, seemed fine, told my friend. I didn't answer. Sometimes the only thing more violent than silence is filling it. Instead, I matched her pace, slow enough that she wasn't being hurried, steady enough that the street felt manageable. She tried again. I thought maybe it was just me. That, right there, that was the sentence that locked into my ribs. Because it was the same sentence I had whispered to myself on my worst dates. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm paranoid. Maybe I should give it 5 more minutes. Maybe I'm overreacting. The dangerous maybes, the ones that keep people seated when they should be walking. It wasn't just you, I said finally, because some silences shouldn't last. She exhaled, sharp, like a balloon losing air. Not quite relief, not quite collapse, something in between. 2 blocks is not a long distance on paper, but when you're walking away from a storm, every step feels like a negotiation. You wonder if the sound behind you is just footsteps, or his footsteps. You wonder if the door you passed will suddenly open and reveal him. You wonder if the city itself has turned into a maze built only to test whether you can keep moving. At one point, she glanced over her shoulder so fast, her hair whipped her cheek. Nothing. Just a cyclist zipping past, water spraying from the tires. But her face tightened, and her steps grew uneven. So I told her what I always tell myself in those moments. Look forward. If there's danger behind, the staff will handle it. Our job is just the next step. She nodded, almost imperceptibly, and lifted her chin again. By the time the hotel sign glowed into view, our strides had found something resembling rhythm. The cab stand was there, just as promised, with a line of yellow cars idling, headlights throwing their steady beams into the misty air. The doorman at the hotel greeted us with the practiced warmth of someone who had seen every story play out under those arches. He took one look at us, her tight grip on her phone, my scanning eyes, the manager lingering 2 blocks behind, and didn't ask unnecessary questions. Instead, he opened a cab door with a flourish that felt ceremonial. She paused. For the first time since the host stand, she hesitated not out of fear, but out of decision. Her eyes flicked to me. "You coming?" she asked, her voice thin but steady. It caught me off guard. I had assumed my role ended here, at the edge of the cab line, but her question wasn't about company. It was about trust. Did she want to be alone right now? Did she want the space to process? Or did she want continuity, someone who would witness the entire sequence so she didn't have to re-explain it to another stranger? I thought about it. I thought about boundaries, about not inserting myself too far into her narrative. And then I shook my head softly. "You've got this. The driver's solid. They'll get you home." For a second, disappointment flashed across her face. Then it was replaced by something steadier, understanding. She slid into the back seat, coat still clutched around her, phone finally resting on her lap instead of clenched in her hand. The door closed with a thud that sounded like punctuation. The cab pulled away, taillights glowing red as they faded into the night. The street felt different once she was gone. Lighter, but also emptier. Adrenaline has a way of leaving you hollow once it burns out. My hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the sudden absence of urgency. The storm had passed, but the echo of it stayed. The manager caught up, finally letting his shoulders relax. "You did the right thing," he said. Simple, unadorned. Then he gave me a nod and turned back toward the restaurant, as though re-entering the current of his shift. For him, this was one of many. For me, it was singular. I stood there for a while, watching the taxis glide past, watching strangers move through their own invisible stories. The city didn't pause to honor what had just happened. It never does. But inside me, something had shifted. Because the best first date escape I ever pulled wasn't just mine anymore. It had become shared, woven into someone else's survival. And in that weaving, it stopped being just an escape. It became proof. Proof that vigilance matters. Proof that strangers can become shields. Proof that sometimes the decision not to leave alone is the one that saves more than just yourself. And as I finally turned back toward the restaurant, slipping into the flow of pedestrians like nothing had happened, I realized that the story wasn't finished. Escaping a night like that doesn't end when the cab door closes. It follows you, into the quiet of your apartment, into the reflection in your bathroom mirror, into the questions you ask yourself in the dark. But for now, at least,
2 people had walked out instead of staying seated. That was enough.
The door eased shut behind the manager, and the kitchen swallowed him again. The dining room noise seeped back into its usual blend of glass, laughter, and rehearsed saxophone. I stood a moment longer on the hotel curb, watching the cab lights turn a corner and vanish into a ribbon of red. The body always pretends it is finished before the mind agrees. Hands stopped shaking first, then the jaw unclenched, then the breath stopped arriving in shallow drips. The street resumed its ordinary negotiations. Rides hailed, messages tapped, weekend outfits crossing against the light, and the night, indifferent as ever, pushed forward. Going back felt like swimming upstream. The same 2 blocks that had lengthened under adrenaline seemed short now, almost comically so. The restaurant's awning caught and held the light. The host stand, seen from the sidewalk, became a small stage again. Inside, nothing looked different, which created its own kind of vertigo. The birthday table had reset to dessert forks. The bartender was towing a line of sparkling water along the wood. The chair I had angled toward the door was still there, proof that physical objects remain loyal even when the story has moved on without them. The host recognized me first, the way people who keep rooms flowing recognize regulars, trouble, and gratitude. No words were needed. A slight lift of the chin, a narrowing of the eyes that asked whether the outside had remained cooperative, and an easing in the shoulders when my answer came back in the shape of a nod. The manager appeared from a side corridor, with the casual authority of someone who multitasks cross crises without naming them as such. He gestured toward the bar, and I followed, grateful for the choreography of ordinary motions: stool, menu, water, receipt. The check had been adjusted in a way that disguised generosity as arithmetic. I left money in excess of reason, gratitude measured in bills rather than sentiment. The server received it with the kind of practiced discretion that protects both the giver and the receiver. The bartender slid over a napkin and a pen, a silent suggestion. I wrote a few lines that thanked the room rather than the people, an attempt to keep identities small and the gesture large. The manager tucked the note somewhere behind the register, a little archive of nights like this. He mentioned, by way of closing the loop, that the table had not followed. There had been irritation, then a complaint about service, then a half-hearted attempt to extend the evening elsewhere that collapsed under its own lack of audience. A check signed, an exit with performative dignity, a door swinging once and returning to stillness. It was not justice, but it was enough for the equation of the moment. Rooms like this can hold only so much aftermath. The rest discharges into the city beyond.
Outside again, the air had thinned. Wind worked its way down the avenue, clipping banners and tugging at jackets. I walked home using the route that combines streetlight with habit, the one that lets you count intersections instead of thoughts. The apartment arrived with its familiar catalog of locks and switches. Maintenance first. Shoes off, lights on in sequence, deadbolt turned, chain slid, windows checked without melodrama. A glass of water that I watched fill, step by step, like proof that control can be reassembled from small parts. A shower hot enough to turn the bathroom into fog. The mirror returned a face that looked both older and more precise, as if adrenaline had sanded away indecision and left the essential outline. The phone went on the counter. A message went out to the friend who holds the check-ins when nights might require them, a simple confirmation that the sky had not fallen. In return came the kind of response that needs no punctuation, just the weight of someone else knowing you are home. The body, finally believing it was not in motion, began the slow accounting. Muscles reported their protests. The neck remembered every angle it had tracked toward a door. Hands cataloged the textures of the night: cold steel, damp air, the paper grain of a napkin, the fine grit of city on skin. Sleep resisted, as it always does when a story remains unsorted. The mind cued alternate versions of the evening and made them walk across the stage, leaving alone through the kitchen without the detour at the host stand, staying at the table and extracting without allies, confronting publicly, a choice the room would not have supported and that would have rewritten the night in ways nobody needed. Each version ended in a different postcard. None improved on the one that had happened. It helped to label these as simulations rather than regrets. The best escape is not the most dramatic. It is the one you can live with tomorrow. Morning arrived honest and a little gray. The city sounded quieter than it had any right to be, a trick of Sunday edges on a weeknight. Coffee made its own argument for continuity. That first sip reintroduces the body to gravity. It reminds you that a day is not an abstract block, but a sequence of swallow, step, task. The phone, inert on the counter, held nothing urgent. Good. Silence has a way of protecting the win. By late afternoon, a small pulse of closure found its way back. The restaurant's account posted a story that was not about me, but about the mirror sign I had seen, one of those public reminders that a room can be a lifeline. The caption framed it as ordinary policy rather than newsworthy announcement. The comments beneath were full of people tagging friends and rehearsing gratitude. The world had not learned our specifics, only the existence of a mechanism. That felt right. Some stories do better as systems than plot lines.
2 days later, a message arrived through a route I would not have predicted. The manager forwarded a note the restaurant had received, written by someone who identified herself only as a grateful guest who had decided not to take a seat that night. It contained thanks for the staff and an apology for space taken, followed by a statement that getting into a cab had felt like stepping out of a tunnel into day. No names, no details that tied anything to anyone. It was the correct size for what we had shared, enough to close the circuit, not enough to open new ones. I replied with appreciation for the team and a request that the credit settle fully with them. The manager sent back a thumbs-up emoji and an inventory of desserts sold during the dinner rush, a joke shaped like a spreadsheet. Weeks pass quickly when ordinary life resumes its gravitational pull. Work insists. Errands multiply. The mind files and loses and finds again. One evening, without planning it, I walked past the restaurant and stepped in. The room looked similar, but not identical. Small changes accumulate like tide lines. The server from that night was off. The host was training someone new. The manager had shaved. I asked for the same seat out of curiosity and found it free, as if waiting. The angle toward the door reproduced itself automatically. The menu, when opened, told the same story in different handwriting. The bathroom mirror still had the sign. It looked newer, perhaps replaced in a recent sweep, but the words were the same. My reflection had recovered the softness that adrenaline steals. I stood there a moment and considered how many tiny decisions separate an ordinary evening from the kind that braid strangers into an alliance. Not grand moral pivots, simple calibrations. Sit here, not there. Water now, not later. Notice the angle of a jaw, the position of a phone, the insistence inside a suggestion. Pay attention until attention rearranges the room for you. Back at the table, the bartender slid a glass across with a faint grin. Recognition travels without needing names. I ate slowly, the hum of the place folded around me in the way only dependable rooms can. Somewhere near the windows, a first date was happening that looked right. Laughter not pushed, elbows not occupying more territory than necessary, curiosity moving in clean lines rather than circles. It felt good to witness that. Proof that vigilance and joy are not opposites. The brain relearns trust by watching safe things occur without interference. Later, in the ordinary quiet of home, I wrote down what I wanted to remember. Not the face of the man, which was already fading into the copy-paste anonymity of people who orchestrate nights like that. Not even the face of the woman, which I hoped would soon blend back into a crowd where she could move without hypervigilance. I wrote instead about the machinery, the staff who turned a dining room into a shield, the ways a city can hold you if you ask it correctly, the truth that leaving is not weakness and that the choice to leave early can be the most disciplined form of hope.
I wrote about rules that had saved me more than once. Choose public spaces for first meetings. Watch every pour. Limit the count, even when stories are good and the lighting is kind. Keep friends in the loop with simple check-ins that do not require elaboration. Sit where you can see more than one exit. Pay attention to how someone treats the people who have no power to impress them. Consider invitations to relocate before dessert as warnings dressed in convenience. Notice the way a person responds when the room stops catering to them. These are not instructions for fear. They are scaffolding for freedom. The goal is not to make every evening a tactical exercise. The goal is to improvise joy without sacrificing sovereignty. The umbrella is not a prison. It is what allows you to leave the house even when the sky keeps changing its mind. Every so often, the mind tries to tilt the memory toward bravado. It wants to rename the night and adventure, to toss glitter over the parts where calculation felt sterile and adrenaline tasted like metal. It is tempting to rewrite it as a story about heroics. That would be dishonest in two directions. First, because the true heroics belong to the staff, who train and rehearse and show up for strangers with no curtain call. Second, because the quiet heart of the night was not spectacle, it was consent reclaimed. I said yes to leaving. She said yes to not sitting down.
The restaurant said yes to being a bridge rather than a backdrop. Those yeses are not loud, but they travel farther than the kind of drama people mistake for significance. The best first date escape I ever pulled was therefore not the fastest, the cleverest, or the most theatrical. It was the one that enlarged the circle of safety beyond my own skin. It is easy to measure success by the speed at which a door closes behind you. A better metric is the number of people who get to step through it. That night, 2 did. The math is simple and decisive. Once in a while, when late-night radio drifts into the apartment and the city sounds like it is tuning itself, I picture the moment at the host stand when the story could have forked the other way. I let it sit there for a breath, not to frighten myself, but to honor the improbability of all the tiny yeses aligning. Then I let it go, because vigilance should never be confused with living in the past. The present wants its share. On another unremarkable evening, a folded card appeared in my mailbox with no return address and a handwriting that carried the calm of someone who had moved on. The message inside was as spare as a receipt. It said that a different date, another week later, had gone better in a way that made first meetings feel possible again. No names, no gratitude theatrics, only the quiet fact that safety had bought a new beginning. The card now lives tucked into a cookbook I almost never use, sandwiched between recipes that require more patience than I usually bring to a kitchen. It is a placeholder for a story that chooses its own scale.
If there is a coda, it is this. The next time I arranged a first date, I still angled the chair toward a door. I still watched the pour. I still sent the check-in text. But I also allowed the possibility that the evening might not need any of those precautions. The body can learn 2 languages at once, caution and ease, and switch between them without apology. The room that night held both. The escape did not erase the appetite for settings that are kind. It refined it. That is the whole of it. A chair angled a few degrees, a mirror with a quiet instruction, a trio of workers who have practiced generosity until it looks like a procedure. A route to a hotel where cars line up like patient lifeboats. A hand on a door bar, metal cool and convincing. A cab pulling away with someone inside who chose what she needed. A return walk that explained itself one street light at a time. And afterward, a life that kept going, punctuated by a memory that fits in the pocket like a key. Small, solid, and exactly the size required to unlock the night.